What if I told you that the majority of the food and the produce that you buy does not come from local farms, despite the reality that local farms do make up the majority of farming across the world? So why is that? What are the challenges it presents and how do we resolve them? Madeline Squarcia from Buy Fresh, Buy Local of the Greater Lehigh Valley joins us to break down those questions and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. All of us have been in a supermarket. We know what it looks like. But what if I told you that the majority of the produce that we purchase doesn't actually come from local farms, even though the majority of farms in the world are local? So why is that? What is that challenge? What does it mean for farmers and what does it mean for you and me in our communities? Madeline Squarcia is the coordinator of local foods and environment at Buy Fresh, Buy Local in the Greater Lehigh Valley. She joins me tonight. Madeline, welcome to Face the Issues. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Sam. I'm happy to be here.
It's great to have you here. You are with a group called Buy Fresh, Buy Local, specifically the Greater Lehigh Valley chapter. Your title is Coordinator of Local Foods and Environment. Let's start just 30,000 foot level. What is Buy Fresh, Buy Local? It's more than just a saying.
Yes. It is a really good saying to begin with. But Buy Fresh, Buy Local is a national organization. Right now it's underneath PASA, which is a sustainable food organization in Pennsylvania. And it basically works to support the local food economy. There's, as you mentioned, I coordinate the Lehigh Valley chapter, but there's, I believe, 19 chapters right now across the United States. Oh, wow. And they're all regionally focused. They all kind of have different focuses and missions and different ways of getting their message out. But yeah, in the Lehigh Valley, we focus on education, advocacy, promotion of the local food economy, and most importantly, connecting the community to the local food resources.
I love what you said about how there's the different chapters across the country, but they all function a little differently. I think it's a huge mistake when we kind of broad brush and we think everybody in the country is exactly the same. So what works in Pennsylvania is going to work in Texas or California, and that's just not the case, right? And so I kind of love how each of you in your individual chapters, you have your own thing, you do it your own way, you know your people and your farmers and your localities better. And so I love that approach to it. Here in the Lehigh Valley, you said a lot of this comes to advocacy, education, and so forth. But what is the mission of Buy Fresh, Buy Local? At the end of the day, what is that you hope to accomplish?
So we definitely hope to build the local food economy to help expand it and to provide the resources that a lot of local small farmers don't have access to because they are focused day and night on just making the food, harvesting, putting the seeds in, doing all the things they need to do to provide fresh local food to their community. So we kind of help to assist them. We have different partners that sign on to the Buy Fresh, Buy Local brand name. It helps to raise awareness of the program and to help provide them support. And it really shows the community members, if you're a Buy Fresh, Buy Local partner, you really care about the locality of what you're doing. And it allows community members to know these people are really caring about how the food is being produced, who it's going to, and how it's going to them. So we're kind of, we're really just working to assist between the community members and act as a liaison between the community members and the local food producers in Lehigh Valley.
Well, let's talk about the why. You said for a lot of these farmers, I mean, and to be fair, that's their day job. They're supposed to be focused on the sowing and the harvesting and the farm part of it. Why is it that why is this, let me start there. Why is it so important for people to buy fresh, buy local? Like, why is that, in your mind, so important for local communities to be purchasing from local farms and local producers?
Well, there's so many reasons. With Buy Fresh, Buy Local, we specifically say there's like 5 reasons why you should buy fresh, buy local. Those include the economy. It supports the local food economy. It supports family farms and farmland in the area. It supports the environment. It's better for the environment to support local food, farms and food. And it's better for your health and it tastes better. So those are kind of the main things we talk about, and each of them I could like dive in deeper to each point, but really, like, the first thing is health. I think a lot of people think about their health and why they should buy local. You don't, when you're buying at the grocery store, you often don't know exactly where that food is coming from, and a lot of times I'm sure people have heard of greenwashing. That's a more common term, but like local washing. So a lot of farms, and greenwashing still applies. A lot of like grocery markets will say it's local, it's in your community, but what does local actually mean? And like large consumer networks, oftentimes they use that kind of just as a marketing tool rather than an actual like truthful term. But when you're buying local straight from your farm community, you know where it's coming from, you know who touched it, you know how it was produced, and you have like a lot more trust and reliability in your local food and farm community. So yeah, and then also like taste, it's more nutrient dense. Local foods produced on small farms without like using monoculture, so like huge, massive industrialized farm systems don't really pay attention to each individual crop. They really are just looking for like bang for their buck, and that's not really how local farms operate. They very much care about each crop as it is and how it will taste, how it's being harvested, and who it's going to. So I don't know if you have any more questions to follow up, but there's so many reasons.
Yeah, there's an interesting, I think, difference that you just brought up, Madeline, that there's a lot of these large farms, if you will, are kind of corporate, right? And we think corporate America, corporations, and at the end of the day, they have a bottom line and they need to make a profit. And so everything becomes mass produced. They ship it all over the world. I mean, we walk into a grocery store and you see the sticker, and a lot of it's not even grown in the United States. Now, to be fair, some of the things can't be grown in the United States, but there are things that can be grown here in state and here in our region, the Lehigh Valley. But local farms tend to have that small business mentality. In a lot of ways, what you're talking about is kind of the small business idea that we talk about outside of produce. You know, small business Saturdays and things like this, supporting your small business. A lot of this is the same, just in the farm world.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, it's really important to support your local farms, not just for yourself, for your health, for the taste, for the environment, but also for the farm communities. If we're investing a lot of our money by going to the grocery store and buying like not seasonal produce that's not in season and from who knows where all over the world, then all of these farmers that are just really working day and night and on their small farms in our local communities are struggling to keep up because all of the funds are going towards the industrialized food system, and that's like bad for us because I think the pandemic is a really good example of that. With the pandemic, you had supply chain issues, and especially with food, people had trouble getting the food that they were looking for, but they could rely on their local farmers, and we saw a lot of increase in the local food economy through the pandemic because it's much more reliable and resilient. Each farmer is able to adjust to the circumstances, to the environment, to their community needs. So it's really important that we continue to support that, especially moving forward with this current climate.
So let's run through a few stats. 84% of the world's farms are considered small farms, and yet the majority of those farmers are actually some of the poorest in the world. And here in the United States, so not just our area, but across the country, local farms only produce the produce for 1.5% of the produce that we see across the country. My guess is that these large corporations ship everywhere, but a local farm here in the Lehigh Valley, for example, their produce is just going to Lehigh Valley residents and communities. They're probably not shipping all over the world. And so to your point, if we're not buying it, then they don't have that same market that say a large company or corporation might have.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think people realize the power they have and the choices they make and where they spend their money. But it is really interesting, and I think you raise a good point of even though the majority of farms are considered small local farms, they're still the poorest in the world, and they're not receiving a lot of money. And because part of that is because monocultured and industrialized food systems, they're producing a ton of stuff, just one type, which is terrible for the environment. And the taste and the quality of the food isn't as good either. But an interesting fact is that in Pennsylvania is the second largest farm direct farm sales in, I think, the United States, right behind California, which is really surprising considering how large California is and how small Pennsylvania is. But even with that, only about 2 to 3% of the average person's food budget goes towards local food. So it's just, I think this just shows, like, for one, Pennsylvania has a ton of options, and it's really has a lot of agricultural resources, especially small local farmers. So it's so important that we try to, if we can, spend more money and time thinking about that and investing in the local food economy.
Yeah, and you're not wrong. I mean, this is a big agricultural state. I mean, we think about Pennsylvania, we think about its city centers in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and so forth. A lot of agriculture in the state. Here in the Lehigh Valley, but throughout central Pennsylvania especially, right? Very, very agricultural state. And there's a big farmland preservation movement in the state, and we talked about it in this show before. So it is an ag state. Pennsylvania, I mean, we have the largest indoor farm show in the country, which is coming in January. And so it's neat to hear that we are doing so well in the sense that we're the second in the country, but yet even at that level, it's only a very, very small percentage that's going directly to farmers. Madeline, we're gonna cut the break here in a moment, but when we come back, I wanna talk about the why you think this is the case, and also what you and your organization is doing to try to rectify that.
Sounds good.
Don't go away, we'll be right back.
Face the Issues is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Madeline, thanks again for joining me. I want to pivot our conversation a little bit. We talked a lot about what is buying fresh, buying local, why it's important. I want to talk about why it doesn't happen more. When we left off, you gave us a percentage number. Pennsylvania ranks very highly across the country, but even there, very, very small percent of our produce comes directly from our farmers, despite how big of an agricultural state this is. I want to start with this question. Why do you think so few people buy local?
So I think there's many reasons, and it depends on the people and the community. There's so many factors that influence people's decision for where they get their food and how they get it. I think one of the first challenges is access and equity, and it deals a lot with like systemic issues, especially a lot of like our food economy is controlled by the industrialized food systems. So it makes it challenging a lot of times, like food deserts and things where places don't really have access to local foods and community members who need it most. So that's like a reason for why they might just not have access. Another thing is equity, and I have like a flip side to each of these. But then the other point on equity is like if they're not being able to get what they need. So some cultures prefer citrus foods is more dominant in their food and their cultural foods. So we can't really grow that here in the United States, except for on the West Coast in some cases. So when it comes down to seasonality, that's like core to buying fresh and buying local. And so sometimes just based on your culture, it might not be available to you. So then you might make the decision then to buy some of your foods from the supermarket where it's more accessible. But on that note, equity and accessibility can be more strong in the local food system. For one, I know many farmers who they talk to their community members, and depending on their ethnicity and where they come from, if they want a certain kind of food, they're able to grow that for them, of course with our environment and climate in mind. But they have much more say and opportunity to really have influence over the kinds of crops that they're growing to best fit their community needs. And then in terms of access, especially Buy Fresh, Buy Local, we work a lot to try to increase accessibility to local foods. But then there's also the issue of seasonality, as I had mentioned, that can be a challenge sometimes. Seasonal issues are always something to be considered. There's only certain foods that you can get at a certain time locally, depending on what season it is and when it grows. But that's always something, there's always food growing, and I think a common misconception is that even the winter time, people stop going to the farmers markets and they stop buying their food locally because they assume there's just nothing left. But that's not the case. Of course, it's more like hardy greens, and you can only eat so much kale, but they're still great, and it's really important to still continue to support as much as possible. And then ease, I think, is something that most people think of, to buy locally, you have to kind of go out of your way maybe, or just a misconception of like it being a niche market and like you might not fit into that. And I know, like me personally, I'm kind of new to the local food system to begin with, and I didn't grow up going to the farmer's market. I just didn't think that I was really like, didn't fit that vibe, I guess you could say. But that's like so not true. I think the local food economy and the local food community is the most accessible and like supportive environment I've been in, and I really appreciate that. But yeah, so I think it really comes down to a lack of proper education and the misconceptions built around industrialized food.
Yeah, and there's so much nuance in that you just brought up, and this notion of, and something I didn't even think about, this notion of equity and being in part, you know, where's that connection with your local farmer, and then in part, some of these cultures prefer this kind of food which might not be grown locally, which might not be grown in season, and understanding that nuance. And I appreciate you kind of going into the details as opposed to this broad brush idea of it's this or that. I want to ask you about the challenges to buying local. You just talked about some of those. There's this obviously ease, right? And there's a sense when, especially if I need something now, you go to the grocery store, you get it. But also you said there's a sense in which, like for you didn't really think you fit into a farmer's market. Where do some of those challenges you think come from buying local? Like for you, you know, was it just you didn't grow up with it? And then what eventually got you to say, let me go check out my farmer's market?
Yeah. Well, I think for me personally, I think, it stemmed from my family. We didn't come from a farm family. And I grew up with my parents getting their food from the supermarket. Didn't really think too much about where it was coming from, but I always really cared about I always cared about people and the environment. I just didn't really know to what extent or how it fit in until I got to college. But I think, I think that all of these are challenges, and there are challenges depending on the person, but I think there's a flip side to each of these, and it's important to consider those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about that flip side. How do you remove the barriers? I mean, you've done this yourself, right?
Yeah.
It's not the environment you grew up in. You've had to come around in some ways. How do you remove those barriers and help people to buy fresh and buy local?
Well, I think the first step, I think this is a question that comes up in everything, all current issues, is how do you remove those barriers? And I think often the answer is education and just like communication. So I think first step is me being here, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
Because it allows me the opportunity to really speak to this point and to help spread awareness. But yeah, so I think education is key to help inform people that may have not had the opportunity to learn about the importance of local food before, or where their food's coming from. And like a lot of people don't even realize like a lot of the issues in their industrialized food systems, or like that there's preservatives and different things that could be influencing their health. So yeah, education is key. We also do a lot of promotion and like try to just support and connect and show where you can get your local food. So it's a lot easier than people think, and Buy Fresh, Buy Local works really hard to try to make it even easier by identifying like different categories. And one of the things we do every 2 years, we produce this local food guide, which I think is pretty nice. But it shows all of our different partners and where they're located and how you can get to them, their hours. We have a website that has a local food finder, so you just type in what you're looking for and it will identify your local farms and local foods. So yeah, there's so many really good resources out there, and I think it's just continuing to spread awareness about them and to talk about these important issues.
Yeah, and that's so cool. I didn't even know about this local food finder.
Yeah.
It's like a Google, but just for local fresh foods.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, yeah, as much as our nonprofit can make it like a Google,
Sure.
And our website, actually, we're currently updating it and trying to improve it right now, but it is a really good resource.
And what is that website?
buylocalglv.org.
Well, I was going to ask you what are ways that people can shop local. I think your guide is a great example.
Yes.
One of the neat things I read through the guide on the website, one of the great things about it, the interesting thing is that it's not just, I think people have this idea that you just drive to a farm, and if I don't know any farmers, I can't buy local. But your guide talked about farmers market. I remember growing up, going to the Allentown farmers market. I grew up in this area, and having all those different farmers and even like the bakeries and things like that are local that bring their stuff there. Where I teach Northampton Community College, which you're familiar with, we've done the farmers market for years at the college, and also wineries are also considered local. What are other ways that people can buy local?
So there's so many options, especially with Pennsylvania being like really having so many different farms and ways to access the local foods. But there's one market, so you already brought that up. That's a really great opportunity, especially for people that like the community aspect and like to feel like they're in a different environment and to really have a connection with their farmers. I personally go to the farmers market now almost every weekend, partly for my job, but also personal, because it's just so much fun. And it's like really, it's just really a supportive environment, and everyone's really passionate about what they're doing. Yeah. So yeah, that's a huge thing, is the farmers markets, and it's pulling from all different resources from all over. But then also there's farm stands. A lot of farms have their own farm shops and farm stands directly at their farm or on the roadside. So depending on your route, it's just building a new habit. It's identifying where you can get your food easily for you. So like whether it's on your driving route home, you can stop by the farm stand every once in a while, or go to a market every Saturday and get your local produce or your local meats. And then there's CSAs is a huge thing too.
And what are CSAs?
So CSAs are community supported agriculture. Okay. So it's basically like a subscription box. And I mean, subscription I think is the biggest thing nowadays. Like everybody has a subscription for everything. So why not for your food? But it's a really great resource. It's basically, it helps to support the farmers early in the beginning of the season when they're buying seeds, they're buying farm labor, they're buying machines and materials to start putting down the seeds before the harvest and the growing season. So it provides them an upfront certain price of what their farm market box subscription is. So they have that money to work with. And then each week throughout the growing season, the farm community and the community that is paying for that subscription, they can come and get their farm market box filled with seasonal produce. Cool. And there's different kinds, there's different setups, but it's a really great opportunity to have like an easy, regular access to those fresh foods. Yeah,
that's so cool, because now it's so trendy to do things like HelloFresh and things like that. And you can essentially do it with local farms.
Oh, yes, local farms. And also I think it's more personal too, because you have the connection with your farmer and your farm community, and also you're able to talk to them. And partly why I love the farm community so much is because every farmer has a story, and every farmer has like their passion and their motivation for why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, they wouldn't be doing it day in and night if they weren't enjoying it. So I would even say CSAs and local farms are better than the HelloFresh, but that's just
I wouldn't disagree. Yeah, exactly. Same idea, but you got to do it locally.
Yes.
So Madeline, that is incredible. We're going to cut the break in. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about your personal journey and all of this.
Sounds good.
So don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Madeline, thanks again for joining us and for this conversation on just local farms. And it's not just about food, it's also about the economy. It's about farmers, it's about community and families. I want to ask you a little about your personal journey. You're a recent college graduate, Lafayette College here in the Lehigh Valley. You talked earlier about how you didn't grow up with this. Can you talk us a little bit through your journey to buy local, buy fresh, or buy fresh, buy local, and why? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I mentioned earlier, I did not really grow up in a local food systems thinking. My family did it how most people do it. They just go to the grocery store for what they need. I didn't really think twice about it. But I always had this sense of care and excitement for knowing where things come from and systems thinking, which I didn't know until college. Like I couldn't really put words to it until I got to college. And at Lafayette, I was fortunate to study engineering studies, environmental studies, and I was exposed to our many different systems, and I was really touched by the food economy because it impacts everyone, and everyone has to eat food, so it's important to really consider where you're getting your food and how it's influencing the broader picture. So that's kind of how I first got interested in it. And then I started volunteering on our farm at Lafayette, which is called The Farm. And I just fell in love with the farmers, the community, the volunteers. I loved how how intentional everyone was, and this is true for all of my experience. I mean, we have about 90 partners right now,
wow.
and I mean, I can't say that it's across the board. Everyone is so intentional, and the farms are much more sustainable, small local farms, and sustainability is something I definitely knew I wanted to get involved with. So I was really blessed with the opportunity to work for Nurture Nature Center with the Buy Fresh Buy Local program. It kind of just happened. Well, my mom always said growing up, whatever's meant to be will be, and this, I just roll my eyes when she says that, but this really felt like that. So I feel so fortunate to be in this position and to be able to work with such wonderful people who really care about what they're doing and how they're doing it, and then to be able to support the community to get access to fresh local food.
Oh, that's incredible. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much
for doing what you do. And again, congratulations on your graduation.
Thank you.
for being just such a great place that you can work with your community and influence them.
Yeah, and I'm learning so much, so I'm happy to be here.
That's the key. And you know, we never stop growing as students. We never stop learning.
Yes.
So
Thank
fantastic.
you so much.
Thank you, Madeline. I want to thank Madeline Squarcia for joining us today. And of course, I want to thank each of you for tuning in as well. Hope you'll join us again right back here next week. Until then, my name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.